She had mud in her mouth and rope burns on her wrists when he last looked at her. The men who tied her there, behind the cabin like a dog, laughed as they threw scraps of bread on the ground, watching her crawl on her knees to reach them. And still not once did she scream. Not once. The desert wind had dried her lips and scorched her cheeks. But her eyes, they burned with something older than pain, older than rage. It was betrayal. 3 weeks ago, she had brought those very men water from her clay pot when the sun stood like fire above the hills. She had let them into her land, into her father's house after he died, coughing blood by the riverbank. She had trusted them because they had worn her brother's name on their tongues. But they had lied. Like jackals in human skin, they had come not for help, but for her father's hidden rifle, the old one with the bone handle and the words, "To protect, not rule," carved into the stock. They wanted it because it had once saved this entire valley during the flood war with the southern tribes. That rifle was legend and power, and she was the last to guard it. When they didn't find it in the house, they beat her. Not with fists, but with shame. First they tore her mother's veil from the wall, then her father's grave marker from the field. Then they tied her in the back like an animal, so the rest of the men in the village could see how a woman breaks when she holds secrets. But she didn't break. They didn't know that she had buried the rifle with her own hands 3 nights before they came. Deep. So deep even the ancestors couldn't smell it. They thought her silence was weakness, that her downcast eyes were surrender. It was neither. It was the silence of a storm waiting. It was the stillness of a wolf before it bites the hand that feeds it. The night she broke her chains, there was no lightning, no gods in the sky. Just the moon, fat and white and watching, like an old widow waiting for blood to spill. Her wrists had grown raw, and the wood post she was tied to had softened from the blood and sweat soaking its base. She had spent 3 days testing the knots, learning their pattern, learning the patience her mother had once taught her while weaving jute baskets. When the knot finally gave way, she didn't scream. She knelt in the dirt, her knees trembling, her face streaked with blood and dust. Then she stood. Not straight, not yet, but taller than they had ever seen her. Inside the cabin, the traitors were drinking. They had moved in as if they owned the place, her father's roof, her brother's bed. One of them was wearing her uncle's boots. She picked up the old axe from the chopping stump, then the rifle she had buried behind the mulberry tree, wrapped in cloth, untouched by time. When she stepped into the cabin doorway, they looked at her like a ghost. And then she whispered, "Now you are free." And the first shot rang out. They say in the hills that revenge is a thirsty horse. It never stops running till it's drunk on blood. But what they forget to say is what it does to the rider. That night, she didn't stop with the axe or the rifle. She walked through her father's field, across the dry stones and thorn roots, toward the place where it had all begun, toward the village elders, toward the men who had turned their faces away when she begged for help, toward the one man who once said he would protect her, but had taken gold coins to keep quiet. That man was her fiancé. She had once carved his name into a piece of birch and tied it to her braid. Now, that braid was gone, cut short with a hunting knife the night before she rose. And his name. Soon, the dust would carry it away like the bones of all cowards. But even storms get tired. Even wolves must sleep. By dawn, her feet were blistered, her hands shaking, the axe heavier than her soul. She collapsed near the old salt well, the one that no one drank from since the locust season. Her breath was short, her knees bled, and that's when the boy came. Small, maybe 9, with cracked lips and sunburned cheeks. He didn't speak at first, just watched her from the trees like a shadow. And when she looked up at him, eyes wild, jaw clenched, he simply asked, "Are you the one they chained?" She nodded. He held out his water flask and whispered, My mother said not all monsters live in caves. Some wear smiles. She drank in silence, and for the first time in a long time, her hands didn't shake. But neither of them noticed the hoofbeats. Not yet. The hoofbeats grew louder, thunder over dry bones. She didn't run. She placed the flask gently into the boy's hands and turned. Her body toward the ridge, her spine straight as iron, the rifle slung across her shoulder like a second name. The boy watched her with wide eyes, like a rabbit waiting for the hawk's shadow, but she wasn't afraid. Not now. Not anymore. 12 riders, each wearing a stolen piece of her life. Her brother's bronze cuff, her father's leather belt. The dark-eyed traitor with her cousin's shawl wrapped around his mouth like war paint. They had stripped her family piece by piece, buried their honor beneath coins and lies. And now they wanted the one piece they had failed to take. Her breath, her fire, her end. She stood at the edge of the salt well as they circled, horses snorting, blades flashing in the rising sun. The leader dismounted slowly, as if savoring the moment, his boots kicking up the red dust that carried the scent of old blood and dry sorrow. He walked with the arrogance of a man who had never been denied anything in his life. "You killed 6 of mine," he said, his voice soft and oily. "No," she answered, her eyes never leaving his. "I buried 6 thieves. If any of them were yours, then your herd was sick from the start." He smiled. "You speak like your mother. I remember her. She spat in my face the day we took your land." "She died for it," she said. "Will you?" His smile died. "You're a lone woman," he hissed. "This is not a ballad. There's no prince hiding in the trees, no tribe coming to save you. There's only you and us." Behind him, the other men laughed. She let them. She unshouldered the rifle slowly, like one might lift a child from a cradle, gentle, but with purpose. Her thumb slid across the carved words again. To protect, not rule. She didn't speak. Again. She didn't need to. The first shot cracked through the morning like lightning splitting the bones of the earth. The second dropped the man beside the leader before his hand reached his scabbard. The third she saved. She dropped to the ground as the others charged, bullets screaming, hooves slamming down like war drums. The boy didn't run. He stayed hidden behind the bramble bush, his hands clenched tight around the flask, eyes leaking. Silent tears. She moved like memory, half ghost, half storm. Each bullet she fired carried a name. Her father, her brother, the mother who once danced under the monsoon rain, the uncle who planted wheat with cracked hands and sang songs no one remembered. And when her bullets ran out, she gripped the axe. 2 men reached her. Only one walked away. But not for long, because the last bullet she saved wasn't for them. It was for the one watching from the hill, the one who hadn't moved, her fiancé. He sat on horseback, draped in tribal black, the color of mourning, of dignity. He had no such thing left. He had sold her for 10 goats and a silver cup, had given her father's land deed in exchange for keeping his position as village elder's right hand. She had loved him once. He had called her Wildflower. He had promised to build her a stone house with wind chimes made from river shells. Now he couldn't even look her in the eyes. She stepped forward, gun raised. His men stood frozen, not from fear, but from shame. Because she had done what none of them dared. Faced the pack, faced the past, faced herself. He raised his hand slowly. "Please," he said. "They made me—" She fired, not at him, at the ground by his horse's legs. The beast reared and he fell, face first into the dust of the field he once promised to till with her. She walked up to him slowly, kneeled beside his broken figure, and whispered, "You don't get to die for this. You get to live with it." Then she left him there, coughing blood and dirt and regret. By the time she returned to her father's cabin, the smoke had faded, the blood already drying on the stones. She buried the dead, hers and theirs, under the neem tree. Marked. None of their graves. The desert would do that in time. She washed her hands in the well and sat on the porch, staring out at the dying sun. The boy returned at dusk. He had gathered dates and wild figs. He sat beside her in silence, chewing thoughtfully. "Will you leave?" he asked. She looked at the horizon. It was wide and cruel, like life. "No," she said. "This is my land. My war is done." Looked at her arms, wrapped in linen, red seeping through. "What if they come back?" She glanced at the rifle beside her. "Then I'll bury them again." The night settled like a curse. The wind no longer howled, it whispered. Dry leaves curled along the earth like broken tongues, and the moon watched through the thorns, half hidden, as if ashamed of what it saw. She did not sleep. She sat against the cabin wall, one hand resting on the rifle, the other holding the boy close. His breath was shallow, his body curled like a child who had seen too much and spoken too soon. "My father was one of them, and he's not dead." His words clung to her like the blood under her nails. She didn't ask who. She didn't ask where. It didn't matter. A name wouldn't undo anything. A face wouldn't change what had already cracked wide open inside her. But she needed to know. At dawn, she boiled water. The boy didn't speak again. He watched her the way a wounded hawk watches the sky, hoping it wouldn't call him yet. She wrapped her hands, tucked her braid behind her shoulder, and placed the axe beside the rifle. "Where is he?" The boy hesitated, biting his cracked lip until it bled. Then finally he said, "Beyond the salt hills, in the hollow where the wild dogs feed." Of course. The hollow. No law reached there. No man returned with his word whole. She loaded the rifle, slung it over her shoulder, and held the boy's face gently. "If I don't come back," she said, "this land is yours. Bury me near the neem tree, not beside the others. I don't want their shadows near me." He nodded slowly, tears slipping free, but she wiped them away with her thumb. "Strong hearts don't cry until after," she whispered. And then she left. The path to the hollow was not marked, but she didn't need markers. She followed the crows, followed the smell of rot and regret. Her wounds throbbed under the linen, but her feet were steady. She passed the grave of her uncle, half dug by jackals. She passed the thorn fence where they used to keep the goats. Everything was abandoned now, empty, like a promise broken too, often. By midday the ground turned white from salt. The air hung heavy, choked with stillness. There were no birds, no rustling, just silence, thick and suffocating. And then, voices, rough, low, men speaking in half-whispers. She ducked low behind a rock, peering over. There were 4 of them, and one she remembered well, not by face, but by voice. The same voice that had laughed when she screamed. The same voice that had called her dog when they tied her to the cabin post. He had worn a green sash that day, dust-colored from travel. Now he wore her brother's pendant. It hung from his throat like a stolen prayer. She didn't wait. She stood, gun raised. The sound of the bullet was like thunder cracking open a lie. The man with the green sash fell without a sound, his blood spreading into the salt like ink on parchment. The others screamed, reaching for their weapons. But she moved like fire, merciless, without pause. 2 more fell. Only one remained. He didn't run. He raised his hands, trembling, old, tired. His beard was streaked with gray and sand. His eyes, brown, sunken, filled with disbelief. "You," he whispered. "You're still alive?" She stepped forward, the barrel pointed at his chest. "You're the boy's father," she said coldly. He didn't deny it. "You chained me," she continued, "laughed, burned my mother's shawl, and then you begged for mercy when the EO." Tide turned. "Why should I let your lungs breathe the air you tried to take from me?" His voice cracked. "Because I'm all he has left." She stared at him, long, hard, and for a moment, just a breath, she saw the boy in the man's face. But it wasn't enough, not anymore. "You were given a chance," she said. "You threw it at my feet like scraps." Then she pulled the trigger. Click, no bullet. Empty. He laughed, a broken, choking sound. "Looks like fate wants me alive," he whispered. She stared at the rifle, then lowered it. Not because he was right, but because she was tired of carrying ghosts. She picked up the axe. "Fate has nothing to do with this," she said, and swung. When she returned, the sun had already fallen. The sky was purple and bruised, and the wind had turned cold. The boy stood on the porch. She didn't speak, he didn't ask, but in her eyes, he found the answer. "Where is he?" he asked. "Gone," she said simply. The boy nodded. "I didn't want him to live," he said, "but I didn't want you to kill him either." "I didn't," she replied. "The axe did." The fire flickered low, throwing long shadows across the earth. Her fingers hovered above it, still and rigid, as if burned by a truth hotter than flame. The boy sat opposite her, cross-legged, hands clutching the torn hem of his shirt. He had not blinked since he'd said it. "I know where the gold is buried." She spoke carefully, each word carved from stone. "You saw them dig it up?" He nodded. "They took it in a mule cart, 3 years ago. I was hiding under the cart with the goats. They thought I was asleep. But I watched. They said, 'This is what we killed for.' Her father was a fool to hide it." Her throat closed. The weight of everything came rushing back. Her father's strange silences before the raid, the way he'd sealed the floorboards near the prayer mat with iron nails, the day he made her promise, "Never trust a man who smiles when he lies." She had thought he meant her fiancé. He'd meant them all. "Where?" she asked. "In the valley," the boy whispered, "behind the blue rocks, where the wild bees live." The old honey cave. She remembered now. A place her father once called God's mouth. At first light, they left. She didn't speak much. Neither did the boy. He carried a knife. She carried her father's empty satchel, stitched with faded thread and one word in red: justice. The path to the blue rocks was treacherous, thorns thick as arms, stones that shifted beneath your feet like lies. But they moved swiftly, guided by a hunger that had nothing to do with food. By noon, they found it. The mouth of the cave yawned before them, its entrance hidden behind a broken tree and thick ivy. Inside, the air was cool and damp. A few bees buzzed lazily, guarding their amber treasure. But deeper in, it was there, a shallow grave of stones, disturbed, the soil loose. She dropped to her knees and began to dig. Her hands bled quickly, but she didn't stop. The boy joined her. Together they unearthed the truth that had been buried beneath betrayal. A wooden box, carved, old. She pried it open. Gold coins, silver bracelets, tribal heirlooms, scrolls sealed with wax. Her father had hidden the wealth of generations, not for himself but for the tribe, for rebuilding, for survival, and they had killed him for it. Not because he hid it, because he didn't share it, because he refused to trade blood for gold, and now it was hers. The boy touched a coin, eyes wide. "What will you do with it?" She stared, at it for a long time, then shut the box. "Nothing. He blinked. Nothing? She stood. If I use it, I become them. If I bury it, I become dust. So I'll guard it. Not for me, for what comes next. That night they returned to the cabin, but something was wrong. The door was open. A scarf fluttered in the wind. Hers, torn from inside. She dropped the box. "Stay here," she whispered. But the boy didn't listen. Inside the cabin, two men waited. Not bandits, not traitors. Officials. Government men with papers and weapons and polite threats. One stepped forward. His eyes were too kind. "We heard about what happened," he said. "The men you killed, the land you hold, the gold you've hidden." She didn't answer. They always smiled before the knife. "We've come to take custody of the boy," he added. That made her speak. "He has no one." "He has the law," the man replied. "And the law doesn't allow a woman with a body count and no marriage certificate to raise a child in a blood-stained cabin." The boy clutched her hand. "Don't let them take me," he whispered. She stared at the men and understood. They weren't here for justice. They were here for the gold, always the gold. She stepped in front of the boy. "You'll leave. Now," she said, "or you'll join the others under the neem tree." Their hands moved toward their belts. So did hers. And before the room could fill with blood again, the boy screamed, "She gave me her name. She made me her son. You! Touch her, and I'll set fire to the whole valley." The men froze. Something in the boy's voice, ancient, cracked with truth, made even their guns shake. And she smiled. First time in years. "You heard him," she said. "Now go." And this time, they did. Weeks passed. The seasons changed. People came, and they listened. To the stories, to the whispers. Of a woman who had bled but never begged. Who guarded her land like a hawk and raised a boy who'd once belonged to wolves. Of gold that was never spent, but always watched. Of a cabin where no liar could enter without their lies peeling off in shame. She became more than woman. She became tale, and the tale became law. The rains came late that year. Dry cracks spread across the land like veins of some dying beast. Crops withered. Goats cried through hollow bellies. And in the valley, even the wind began to walk slower, dragging sorrow behind it like a limp leg. But the cabin stood tall. Not because of wood or nails, but because of the fire she'd left behind in the boy who was now a man. They called him Ruh Edaria, the spirit of the river, because wherever he walked, truth began to flow again. He wore her father's satchel now, stitched and weathered, but sacred. He carried no gold, no weapons, just words. And in a land that had forgotten how to listen, that made him dangerous. One morning, as he repaired the old stable, a stranger approached. Old, limping, wrapped in tribal cloth long faded by sun and shame. He said nothing at first, just stood there, staring at the cabin as if it were a wound he remembered bleeding from. "You've walked far," the man said finally. Ruh Edaria didn't stop hammering. "I live here. You walked far." The man laughed, a brittle, coughing sound. "I knew her," he said. Now the hammer paused mid-air. "She broke her chains," the man whispered, eyes clouded with memories. "But I was the one who put them on." Ruh Edaria turned. "You're not welcome." "I'm not here for forgiveness," the old man replied. "I'm here because truth doesn't stay buried." He reached into his robe and pulled out a torn piece of parchment. Old, water-stained, but still legible. On it were symbols, ancient tribal marks, familiar to Ruh Edaria. He'd seen them before, etched into the prayer stones near the river. "Bend." "This," the man whispered, "was what your mother died for." Ruh Edaria's blood froze. "What is it?" The old man pointed to a place on the map, marked with red. The Chadare Hak, The veil of truth. It was never gold. It was never about coins. It was what your grandfather hid under the valley. Scrolls, prophecies, and tribal laws the invaders burned long ago. It is the soul of this land. And your mother, she knew where it was. That's why they feared her. Not for her rifle, but for what she remembered. Ruidaria's chest tightened. All his life he had thought the fight was over gold. But now, the soil beneath his feet trembled with new meaning. "What do you want?" he asked the old man. "I want to go with you," he said. "I want to show you where your truth sleeps, so I can finally bury my shame beside it." They left the next day, just the two of them, one carrying guilt, the other carrying silence, through the salt trails, past the blood tree, up the ridge where she had once stood with an axe in her hand and thunder in her eyes. 3 nights and 4 days they walked, until the stars above changed shape and the rocks began to hum with old stories. And then they found it, a hidden cave, veiled by time, vines, and bones of animals too curious. Inside, it was quiet, so quiet it felt like they had stepped out of the world. The old man fell to his knees and touched the soil like it was flesh. He began to dig, not frantic, not desperate, but slow, reverent. And when his fingers brushed something hard, he gasped. A chest, but not like the one with gold. This one was wrapped in waxed cloth and sealed with ash. Together they opened it. Inside, scrolls, leather-bound, feather-marked, inked with truth and rebellion, each one bearing the emblem of the old tribe, Aurati Haq, the women of truth. Ruh-e-Daria trembled. This is what they tried to erase? The old man nodded. It's the law your mother lived by, and the law her killers feared. They brought it back, not in secret, but in broad daylight. They read the scrolls under the neem tree. Villagers came, at first curious, then awakened. The scrolls spoke of justice before patriarchy, honor before war, power shared, not stolen. Her voice rose again through every word. She was not gone. She was just returning in pieces. And the men who had once hunted her, they began to sweat under the weight of truth. Some fled. Others begged. One poisoned himself. But the people, especially the women, stood taller. They carved the words into stone. They painted them on walls. And soon, the entire valley whispered a new name. She who broke the chains. The moon was low and blood orange when Ruh-e-Daria crossed the southern border. He rode a black mare his mother once raised, Gurur, named not for pride, but for dignity. The mare knew these lands better than maps, knew where blood had been spilled and where secrets still trembled beneath stones. The girl who brought the letter rode behind him, barely 13, with eyes too old for her face. She had not cried once since they left, only clutched the scroll, bagged to her chest like it was her only organ that still worked. "They killed my aunt," she finally whispered as they reached a charred tree line. He didn't turn. They made her swallow her own ink. She was copying the scroll when they came. Said women who wrote truth deserved to die voiceless. Ruh-e-Daria slowed the horse. What was her name? Janan. Then we ride for her now. The village they arrived in, Dozake-Kandan, looked like it had forgotten what joy was. Doors hung off hinges, mud cracked in prayer-shaped patterns. No child laughed. No rooster crowed. But there was life, hidden. Old women who blinked too fast, young girls with bruised palms, and men who refused to look Ruh-e-Daria in the eye. He understood. Tyranny doesn't just scar the body, it trains the soul to kneel. He made no speeches, no threats, no promises. He simply walked into the village square, placed the scroll bag on the ground, and began to read aloud. At first, only crows listened. But slowly, one by one, heads began to emerge from doorways, shawls pulled tight, hearts pulled tighter. He read about Zarguna, the warrior woman who once made a king eat dirt for his lies. He read about Sakia, who healed even her enemies before the battle. He read about justice, not as a sword, but as a mirror no man could avoid forever. And then, a slap echoed through the square. A man had struck his wife for listening. Ruh Edaria didn't flinch. He looked at the man. "Come here." The man spat. "You think your mother's ghost will save you?" "No," Ruh Edaria said softly, "but yours won't save you either." Before the man could move, 5 women stood up. Not one. 5. One by one, they placed their hands on the scroll bag. The man backed away, because even monsters fear memory, and the scrolls remembered. That night, fire returned to the village, not of destruction, but of awakening. Stories were told, truths unearthed. Names of those buried unjustly were carved into walls with charcoal. Even the elders, once silent, began to hum the old songs. But it couldn't last. Not yet. At dawn, they came. Not soldiers, worse, mercenaries, paid by landowners and fake judges, wrapped in law but drunk on greed. They carried weapons. They carried orders. And they carried her picture. She who broke the chains. Dead 10 years, but still feared like thunder in a dry season. "You are her son," their leader said. "Yes," Ruh Edaria replied. "She's not alive to protect you." "Now, she never needed to be," he said. "I was born already protected by her truth." The man laughed. "We'll burn your truth and bury it." Ruh Edaria stepped forward. "Then you better start with me." They did. The first blow broke his shoulder. The second tore his scroll bag. The third sent him to the ground. But then, something impossible happened. The girl who brought the letter, barely 13, stood over him with a burning torch. She screamed. And behind her, 20 more women rose. Mothers, widows, scarred daughters, all holding something that could cut, a knife, a stick, a stone. They surrounded the mercenaries. They didn't shout. They didn't beg. They just stared. And somehow, that silence screamed louder than gunfire. The men hesitated. One lowered his rifle. Another turned and ran. And in less than 5 minutes, all that remained of the threat was dust kicked up by retreating boots. Ruh Edaria lay on the ground, half conscious. The girl kneeled beside him. "You did it," she whispered. "No," he groaned. "She did it. Again." 1 year later. The scrolls had spread. From valley to valley, river to mountain, desert to city, each one rewritten by the hands of those who had once been forbidden to hold a pen. And at the center of it all, under a neem tree in the northern valley, stood a grave. No name carved, just a phrase, "Now you are free." People came from across the land to touch the soil, not because it had gold, but because it had memory. And memory, when watered by sacrifice, becomes a revolution that no fire can erase.